how can media get involved in that, given the facts, given the geopolitics interest involved? That's the first question. Second one is about diaspora's involvement. All three of you talked about it. And how can diaspora get involved? Actually, it's a question to the professor from Sweden as well. Because how we can, because given the fact that there's very little privacy in the digital age, because we don't know what's being monitored and not, and even though we have the social media available, how we can use it to get information out of Sri Lanka.
And I would like to ask a question for the panel as a whole. I suppose we all agree there is a problem of like a lack of attentions on democratisation or human rights violation or on those serious issues in the media industry. And I would like to ask, what do you think is the most urgent action we need to take rather than discussing the issues? So what do you think was the actions we needed to take in the future or next? Is that in a political area, like, is that an action to against the political power or the Chinese power, or is that the action in the economic area for the media to have more money support, to have that power to has more power in finance, or is that the action in the cultural domain to against the discriminations, or the first professor speaker speaks in the ethic imperatives, or is that an action we lead in the journalism, in the media, to have a clear standard, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? Do we need a clear standard, Universal Declaration of journalism based on human rights? Which one do you think is the most urgent that we need?
In fact, I was trying to articulate a question from the time Pakisudi Saravanamuthu started to speak, but I found the answers in the other speakers. They gave the answers to some of the issues I was thinking. But however, there are a couple of issues, but again, in order to keep it very short and precise, I would like to ask Mr. Pakisudi Saravanamuthu about the issue of the diversity in the media. He touched on the issue of Sinhala media, how they are reflecting the articulation of issues, and the English media taking a different turn, and the Tamil media being focused on a different angle. Now, you can see within the Tamil media, there is no reflection as far as Tamil media is concerned, what is articulated in the English media. There is a wide range of information available in the English media about the Sri Lankan issues, where diverse views have been expressed. Now, how this issue can be translated or brought into the Tamil diaspora, because why the Tamil audience or Tamil readers or Tamil media readers, that has to be reached, that should be reaching the Tamil people. How can that be articulated, and what we can do about it?
Firstly, you touched upon the 13th Amendment. The panel seems to take the view, if my guessing is right, that the 13th Amendment is neither a starting point nor even a beginner, or it can't meet the aspirations of the Tamils. But unfortunately, the Human Rights Council resolution revolves around the 13th Amendment, and in the context of the support that we are receiving from the international community, if you were to ask more, would we get anything at all on the 13th Amendment? And also in view of the current judiciary, which is neither independent nor impartial, what could you get even if we want to fully implement the 13th Amendment? You already know former Chief Justice Sarath M.G. Silva has made a decision previously with regard to the North and East annexation, and that stands as an obstacle, an issue to take that forward. On the 6th Amendment and the removal of the Prevention of Terrorism Act, now is it politically viable to talk about these issues in the current context of the Mahinda Rajapaksa regime? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. The question relating to R2P, that is responsibility to protect, and how journalists can be involved. Well, basically, when the doctrine was formulated in 2001 by the International Commission on Intervention and State Sovereignty, the emphasis, as I said, was more on the state, as the state actors and the international community. Nothing was really mentioned about the role of journalists, and yet we see that in terms of agenda setting, the media, they're playing a very important role in influencing the decisions of politicians, and business actors in most of what we are seeing happening. There are a lot of stakes, when there is a conflict. You have businesses making a lot of money out of it. People, they don't care about who is going to die, who is going to be a victim. As long as, we have what we call the military-industrial complex, as some of you might be aware of. The powers are making a lot of money, and it's like they have to try and make wars, to make sure that the engine, the machine, keeps rolling. And this is a very big concern, and the media are kind of enlisted in this whole thing, which I can maybe put in the context of the political economy of war and how the role of the media in that. So if the responsibility is going to be put on the state and the international community to do something, the journalists also must bear responsibility, because when you say that people have right to be protected, that you're talking about right holders, and in the context of human rights, you have people who are the right holders, but you also have people who are the duty bearers. And we cannot just limit the duty bearers to just the state actors and the international community. We have to look at also the journalists, you see, and it's unfortunate. I think this is something that media researchers to really look into and try and develop that particular aspect. Particularly so when journalists also draw their powers, from the human rights doctrine, particularly Article 19. You see. So looking from that perspective, I am calling for, it's not there yet, you see, I am just calling that attention should also be paid to the role of the journalist, as duty bearers, bearing the duty to make sure that there is empowerment. These 5 principles of human rights journalism, standard of principle, empowerment, accountability, non-discrimination, and participation. All these principles are taken on board. And if a journalist cannot play a role to push these 5 principles, then there is a problem there. So I'm just trying to raise the question that we need to. And we cannot perform that role. I mean, journalists generally cannot perform that role if the focus is just on objectivity, you see. So that's why I'm talking about also how can journalists see themselves playing the role beyond this notion of objectivity, professionalism, okay? What about advocacy journalism as well? Advocating a just cause, not advocating unjust cause, you see. So that's where I made an argument in my book, Human Rights Journalism, that you cannot. Because this idea of objectivity, in fact, does not really exist. But journalists, in most cases, journalists construct reality. But the problem we are seeing is that journalists construct reality in favor of injustice. That is the general trend. That's what we are seeing. And we are not seeing much of journalism that is promoting justice. And that's where the problem is. You see, the notion of objectivity is a very contested one. Most even journalists hardly admit that it exists. So if it does not exist, and what exists in reality is advocacy journalism, then why do we have to advocate wrongs in society? Why don't we advocate rights in society? So that's the argument I'm trying to make here. I'm looking at journalists as duty bearers. The other point that was raised actually was what object action is really needed by enhancing the powers of journalists, within the context of their power, and how can they work within the structures, the political and economic structures that define themselves, because there are a lot of structures, and how can they navigate that? And basically, journalists should just try and emphasize their watchdog role. That's the only way they will be able to overcome that. You see, they should have a kind of a political economic perspective in their work. You see, you have to be very sensitive to what we call spin as journalists. If you are not sensitive to spin, whether by politicians or by corporate actors, then you are not going to be a good journalist. But if you are sensitive to that and you try and inculcate some aspects of critical journalism, sensitive to what is being that is not in the public interest. If you cannot manage that, then it's very difficult for you to be a very good journalist. So that's what I think. Journalism, the public interest, is the type of journalism that the whole idea of journalism was really founded. The traditions, the watchdog role. But that is now, is increasingly been lost. Missing in the kind of lost in translation, if you like. What we are seeing is the other aspects, and I think we need to come back to where really journalism belongs. That is serving the watchdog role, critical watchdog role. Be it, keeping an eye on what the politicians are doing, that may not be in the public interest, or what businesses are doing that may not be in the public interest. I think the public interest should be the paramount thing, and with that, I think journalists will be able to perform their role better, whether in a conflict situation, or post-conflict situation, or pre-conflict situation. But I hope I've been able to address the two questions.
Okay. First of all, I think I fully endorse everything that Dr. Shaw said. I think journalists, whether they like it or not, in the kind of post 9/11 situation, in the kind of sort of context of terrorism and the so-called fight against terrorism and all of that, journalists invariably become human rights defenders, whether they like it or not. And it's something that they need to be conscious about. And I think that this sort of false dichotomy, this nonsense about not being political, really needs to be blasted out of the water. At the end of the day, there are the sins of commission and there are the sins of omission. And if journalists at the end of the day want to be hanged for the sins of omission, I think they really need to think twice with regard to it. They are political. We in civil society are political too. I think the real issue, the real debate has to narrow and focus on as to whether you want to be partisan political, whether you want to be representing a political party in the political stances that you take. And I think you should be allowed to, as long as you're open and honest about it, so that your readers, the public at large, your colleagues in civil society, etc., know what you are. The honesty at that level becomes terribly important. Now, the question was asked with regard to what is the level of diaspora involvement that should be there, and what is the urgent action that is needed. I think the way I see it, there are two things. One is the kind of urgent action that is very immediate and has a bearing on the physical security and situation of the journalists concerned. And that is about safe houses, of getting them out of the country whenever it is required to do so. It is being able to ensure that embassies will give visas to get them out. There is all of that with regard to the absolutely urgent, immediate factors affecting their physical security. The second point, though equally important, is the larger question, which Guru pointed to in particular, is the point about the context and the framework in which they operate in, which is particularly repressive, and how you dismantle that. I think it's a sine qua non for any kind of human rights activity in Sri Lanka, and has been the case now for decades. Although it may not be given as much emphasis or profile as is required, is that the PTA has to go. And if you start with that, we all know, for example, when emergency was lifted in Sri Lanka after the end of the war, a lot of those powers were transferred to the PTA. So we need to, apart from the immediate direct personal considerations, also look at the structure of power, the political and legal architecture, which is repressive and has a direct bearing with regard to the situation of journalism. The question was asked about diversity in media. The point that I was trying to make was that there is an extent to which, in linguistic terms, if nothing else, that The trilingual media speaks to what it considers to be its audience, and there is an element of appealing to the lowest common denominator. Now, how can you get a conversation going amongst them? Well, and how can the diaspora help in that respect? I mean, one thing I would like to suggest to you is that why don't you have a website which translates into Tamil what is appearing in the singular media, and indeed vice versa? There must be that expertise outside here. It's sometimes extremely difficult and extremely problematic to find it within Sri Lanka in terms of good translation. And we find this is a major problem even with regard to presidential commissions, people coming and giving testimony and all of that. In fact, I think Douglas Devananda had problems with translation before the Iataj. So, you know, that's something which will be of real value added, because all of us can use it, not just the diaspora alone. And then I come to this question of the 13th Amendment. Yeah, the problem with the 13th Amendment, I suppose, at the end of the day is this. It's there. The Indians were involved in bringing it. And as long as Tamil political representation feels that its ultimate protection, as it were, is India, they will talk about the 13th Amendment. As to where in the hierarchy, as it were, you're going to place the 13th Amendment is not the question. It has to be there, and it has to be pushed forward, because otherwise the Indians might well desert us. So, in the resolution in 2012, in the negotiation of the resolution in 2012, 1213, I think it is 2012 one, I was in Geneva lobbying. And yes, a lot of us did feel that if you didn't mention it or make reference to it, that the Indians may not come on board, and therefore there was a very political dimension to it. We all know that it's inadequate. We all probably know that it's also quite irrelevant. But we have allowed, and I say we have allowed because it has become the case, for the Mahinda Rajapaksa regime to set an agenda with regard to the 13th Amendment first, that one has to talk about 13th Amendment plus, when, if you look at it, if you look at it in terms of the provisions of the amendment, it's the status quo is actually 13th Amendment minus. So you're now to talk about plus, then they whittle even that down, and they make the 13th Amendment the issue. Whereas, as we pointed out, ever since the damn thing was passed, everyone has wanted to talk about going beyond it. But it was inadequate. Yeah. So the issue arises, and it's a perfectly legitimate point, I think, and that's basically this. Does Tamil political representation set the agenda for Tamil political aspirations? Or does it feel that it has to adapt to an existing reality? And it's the old conundrum. You know, do you strike by making the iron hot, or do you strike when the iron is hot? Do you do it and point out that, look, there is a sincerity and honesty of conviction and commitment, and that is where you're going to stand and fight? And I would agree at the end of the day that if, before you can articulate your political aspirations, you have to be concerned about what the Sinhalese would say in the South and what the Indians would say across the Fox Strait, then what kind of self-determination are you talking about?
Thank you. I would like to deal with the two questions, the diaspora's involvement and the role of the diaspora, because of the very little influence that they might be having in creating opinion in Sri Lanka among the Tamils. My position on this is that we have to create, let me put it this way. I think the diaspora has a unique role to play because it occupies transnational position. A position where a lot of Tamils who are in the diaspora are victims of repression, of human rights violations, and so on and so forth, which drove them out of Sri Lanka. And they occupy a position where they are not coerced by the Sri Lanka government and its institutions, which gives them a unique role to play, because they can bring up those important issues, of which two issues which I spoke about. One is accountability, and the other is the inadequacy of the 13th Amendment. Now, of course, there is a firewall in terms of getting some of the issues that are raised and spoken about in the diaspora into Sri Lanka, among the activists, among the people of Sri Lanka, especially the Tamils. But that does not mean that it goes disregarded. As other speakers have pointed out, although there is a firewall, although there is an active endeavors by the Sri Lanka government to stop some of those issues that are raised by the diaspora to penetrate Sri Lanka and influence the Tamil people, it is happening. As other speakers have pointed out, there are ways that people can access the international media, especially the Tamil websites, and so on and so forth. So to say that it does not penetrate does not penetrate Sri Lanka and influence the Tamil people is not quite correct. The second set of issues I would speak in the same context is that we have to create a public opinion outside, speak about these issues freely, create a conversation which in turn could influence international actors who understand that the issues that they are talking about, as the 13th Amendment being the be-all and end-all of providing political space for the Tamils, or accountability, and use that as a way of creating opinion in the international sphere, which in turn could and would, I feel, over a period of time, influence the Sri Lanka government to go back on some of the positions it is arguing. Because finally, don't forget that the international community has a huge impact on Sri Lanka because of the economic, trade, and travel, and various other ways it can influence the Sri Lanka's establishment and the ruling class. So I think there are two ways whereby it is important for the diaspora to speak about this issue. One is that if there is a discussion, much of it might not go into Sri Lanka, but some of it does. And it influences Sri Lanka, especially the Tamils, as well as the senior leadership, the ruling class, because they always tell you, oh, we don't care, we don't care a damn about the resolution. They have said that for the last 4 or 5 years. But if you see what they have been doing for the last couple of years, is to see that international investigation is thwarted in some way, and now to see that it is the worst effects of that is not seen or does not come about. So it is very important that we have this, and so that some of that at least penetrates Sri Lanka. The second, of course, is to influence the international community by speaking to other governments, lobbying other governments, either in Geneva or elsewhere, to pressure in turn the Sri Lanka government and other multilateral institutions like the UN and so on and so forth to bring about a change. The second issue is about the 13th Amendment. To me, the thing about the 13th Amendment, true, as I said in my remarks earlier, India is a very important part of the very important actor to see that it is the 13th Amendment and nothing more that is given the Tamil people. But we cannot let that be, because we can see from our own eyes what that has created in the north and east of Sri Lanka. I mean, if we are talking about politicians who are active in Sri Lanka, they can see that how it has led to the detamilization that Guru was speaking about for a little while ago, and how it has also led to restricting the political space of something like the Northeastern Provincial Council. The Northern Provincial Council. The Northern Provincial Council can't function. So are we going to say 13th Amendment is all that is permitted because India wants it? Which is true, I mean, I'm not denying it. But unless we create a conversation, unless we get a movement going in the diaspora, which in turn I'm sure will be supported by the Tamils within Sri Lanka, nothing is going to happen. We are going to have an inadequate system which, even if it comes finally, as it is, as we were talking about, fully implemented, we are not going to have enough to live and to see that we participate fully in the political processes of Sri Lanka and realize our rights fully. So therefore, while it is true, while that is the issue, that 13th Amendment is what the Indians support, and also by the other sections of the international community, I think it is important for if the existence of the Tamil people is to be ensured, that there is a movement created to say that the 13th Amendment is not enough, it is not sufficient, and we have to go beyond that. Thanks.
Thanks. Let me, just a quick one on the question of what the diaspora can do when it comes to Tamil media. I have had in mind for a long time, though I know that the logistics of working that out and the practicality of it functioning needs to be looked at. I recall back the days of the Saturday Review in Jaffna, what an English publication owned by a Tamil, where the ownership lay with the Tamil sort of ownership, was able to do in terms of highlighting Tamil issue, and we still keep referring to how the Saturday Review did a wonderful job with documentation and bringing out the Tamil issues with an English voice, sort of. I would like to see a situation where we are able to set up and run an English daily. Either I'm in favor of having actually a press, a newspaper, but at least for a start we can function on the web, where stories from the Northeast, opinions, Tamil opinion can be given an English voice. I know that there are diaspora media that function in English, which do a great job. It's not to say that, but I suppose as the optics of, let's say, the legitimacy, I'm not even denying this. There is the optics of the legitimacy. I want to carefully frame this. The optics of the legitimacy of having a homeland sort of English voice coming out and it contributing to better addressing, to better giving voice to the problems of the Tamil people. Now let me get to the 13th Amendment. Very pertinent questions. I for a moment don't undermine the seriousness of the problems that you articulate in your questions, sir. And I'm happy that, and I know that Sara has maintained this principal position for a while. One of the very few, I think, civil society actors that you will see in Sri Lanka who has maintained the principal position over a long period of time. But I want to address your question based on the kind of dichotomous problem that the Tamil leadership faces with that, as articulated by Sara. One is what is in the best interest of the Tamil people, as opposed to what is the existing reality. I've spoken about this so many times that I sometimes get identified too much with the 13th Amendment, which I don't want to. But let me say again what I think should be the way out. For one, I don't think we should worry too much about what the Human Rights Council says as acceptance of the International Committee. I take it as problem. We have consistently, the Tamil Society Forum, in its sort of comments on the resolution, has problematized reference to the 13th Amendment when talking about a political solution in not only the UN Human Rights Council resolution, but also, I remember the first ever communication that we wrote was to Madam Hillary Clinton through Ambassador Blake, who was Assistant Secretary of State, when Blake, in one of his final speeches in Colombo, said he used the phraseology 13th Amendment can be a starting point. And we question as to how the American US position has been that it is for the people of Sri Lanka to sort of come up with a solution. So how come a starting point is being articulated? And the 13th Amendment provides in some way a partial constitutional framework for the Indo-Lanka Accord. To give you examples of how the Indo-Lanka Accord has come back in significance, both Ranil Wickremesinghe and Sambandhan raise the fact that a Chinese functioning in Trincomalee for an aviation base might actually be in breach of the Indo-Lanka Accord, and you can't find two people who are that close to India actually re-invoking the Indo-Lanka Accord. Not the 13th Amendment, by the way, the Indo-Lanka Accord, saying that it violates those arrangements, those defense arrangements that were agreed to between India and Sri Lanka. I think it's very significant. It's part of the Hansard, I'm not lying, you can look for it yourself. So the real concern, and one can see that both Wickremesinghe and Mr. Sambandhan doing it, the real concern being the Indo-Lanka Accord, the defense arrangements, and what Tissa mentioned about Chinese influence in Sri Lanka and how that bothers India. And that's a real concern. So doing away with the 13th Amendment is to touch on the underbelly of the Indo-Lanka Accord. So India has to put pressure on Sri Lanka to retain the 13th Amendment. Mr. Sambandhan in many forums, including in the Northern Provincial Council elections, for example, has acknowledged the fact that Manmohan Singh intervened to make sure that there was no further dilution of the 13th Amendment. Now, I don't see that as a political victory, but that gives you an example of why India is interested in, and how much India is interested in the 13th Amendment. Not really the 13th Amendment, but the Indo-Lanka Accords. What is the way out? The way out to me is to go back, and I've been a massive promoter of this letter. The letter dated 28 October 1987, written to Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi by Siva Chidambaram, Sambandhan and Amarthalingam. Right? What do they say in that letter? They say in that letter that the final version of the 13th Amendment bill, as was presented to Parliament and passed by Parliament after Supreme Court provided review, was not a set of proposals that had been agreed upon by India, Sri Lanka and the TULF as required by the Indo-Lanka Accord. Now again, pardon me for doing this, it's almost become part of my memory. Para 2.15 of the Indo-Lanka Accord says that there are outstanding matters with regard to the political proposal that were being debated from the 1983 onwards, Parthasara the beginning, right? That had not arrived at a conclusion. And Mr. Sambandhan, Siva Chidambaram and Amarthalingam clearly say that the form of the 13th Amendment as presented to Parliament is not something that India even has consented. Now, Rajiv Gandhi fell into pressure from J.R. Jayawardena, agreed to whatever was being presented to Parliament and let that pass. But I think the best way, thinking of existing reality, let us tell, I have no hopes for Mr. Modi in particular, but let's be oblivious to who is in power, but let's say what should the Tamil articulation be. We can possibly say, I mean, if you ask me hard of hard, I don't agree. But we can say that we are not, Tamils are not against Indian defense interests in the region. But we have to clearly say that you have to divorce your defense interests, your military interest in Sri Lanka from what is a political solution for the Tamils. Don't confuse both. On the question of defense interests of India and the Indo-Lanka Accord and whatever is there, the Tamils don't have a problem with India's defense interests in Sri Lanka. We can say that. But we can say that as per the Indo-Lanka Accord itself, procedurally the 13th Amendment was introduced as a violation. Now this is optics, but if you are asking me for let's not hurt India and engage, here is one way of doing it. I mean, this is a suggestion that some of us have been putting forward. I mean, so all I am saying is this is not something that I have come up with all of a sudden. I mean, this has been the articulation of the Tamil people, not only the LTT, for so long. So let me tell you this finally. How did the 13th Amendment enter the discourse of the Human Rights Resolution? If the Tamil side, the TNA, right from 2009 onwards, May 2009, when Shiv Shankar Menon and M.R. Narayanan came to Colombo, had that meeting with the TNA at India House on 18 May 2009, if we had taken the position that the 13th Amendment is a no-goer, India can't afford to give up on the TNA. India won't wash away its hands on the TNA because TNA is an important actor to put pressure on Sri Lanka, right? We all agree. I mean, everyone is acting with national interest. So if we had from day one said no to the 13th Amendment, we would not have ended up in the position where the Human Rights Council resolution talks about 13th Amendment. If the Tamils had consistently said, because now no more can you say that this is some terrorist speaking, quote unquote terrorist speaking. The elected, everyone likes to celebrate the TNA, so the elected members of the TNA are saying 13th Amendment is no good. What can US and India do beyond that? Do you think they'll wash away their hands and look away? No, because they have interests and they want to use the Tamil issue. So here is the opportunity. Now, I think we've waited for so long. We've committed blunders along the past 5 years politically so long, but still the moment is not lost for us to be very accurate, very clear in what our view. So far, the Tamil side has not been able to get up and say this is what we want, right? And I'm saying parallelly, you engage with India saying Indo-Lanka Accord, yes, 13th Amendment, no. Parallelly, now you might have heard of Mavase Nadiraja probably suggesting the Tamil National Council for proposal put forward first by the Tamil Civil Society Forum. We are saying convert the Tamil National Council into something like the Scottish Constitutional Convention of the 1980s, late 1980s. Let that forum engage in a mass-based dialogue with the Tamil people as to what a constitutional future would look like. I know it will be disrupted by the government, but they are already disrupted. Right? What more can can get worse? Get into a conversation, build a bottom-up proposal for a political solution. Make that your thing. Then your proposal will also have democratic legitimacy beyond the legitimacy that elections can confer. I think, and in that exercise, I think the diaspora has to be a crucial partner as well. This is my reading of it, but I will leave it to the detail. Leave the details for another day and for another forum to probably go into it. But here is a twin tack process of dealing with this existing reality. Why can't we pursue this? This is my question. This is what I openly put forward for people who keep throwing this reality at me. Be yadartha gurumaha pesu guruvara inda sollura. I mean, people who tell me speak with reality in mind. Here is possibly quote unquote a realistic solution out of the. Thank you.